arrived and began gathering information, Charles decided he couldn't just drive away and let someone else finish the story. After checking in quickly with the CPS agent, he asked if he could accompany them to the station, at least to offer some support to the little girl who had already come to trust his quiet presence. Ms. Monroe hesitated but eventually agreed, and so Charles followed the caravan of flashing lights through the dusky streets of Decatur, the bus rattling behind like a lumbering yellow dinosaur. At the Eastwood police station, Aaliyah sat in a worn chair outside the family services room, swinging her feet slowly. Her small body was wrapped in a county-issued blanket, and she looked smaller than ever under the harsh fluorescent lights. Charles sat down across from her, removing his ball cap respectfully and resting it in his lap. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently. She nodded, but said nothing. After a moment, she fished something from her jacket pocket. A small plastic charm bracelet missing half its beads, and began twisting it nervously between her fingers. Charles watched her, feeling a hollow ache settle in his chest. How long had she been trying to hold herself together with nothing but tiny scraps of comfort like that broken bracelet? A social worker finally called them into a small interview room. The walls were painted a sickly shade of green, meant to be soothing but succeeding only in looking tired. Charles stayed back against the wall while Ms. Monroe knelt in front of Aaliyah. "Sweetheart, can you tell me about the note we found? Who gave it to you?" Aaliyah shrank back in her chair, and Charles saw her hands clench into tiny fists. After a long pause, she whispered, "It was Mr. Reggie, Mama's boyfriend. He said if I told I'd be taken away and Mama would go to jail." Ms. Monroe kept her voice steady. "And the pills in your lunchbox?" Aaliyah hesitated. "Sometimes he made me take medicine. Said it would make me grow up faster. I didn't like it. Made my stomach hurt." Charles's fists clenched involuntarily. Rage simmered low and dangerous in his gut, but he forced himself to stay silent. Aaliyah needed calm, not more shouting. Over the next hour, a clearer and darker picture emerged. Reggie Simmons, the mother's boyfriend, had been using threats and emotional abuse to control Aaliyah while her mother, addicted and indifferent, looked the other way. The pills were a mixture, some ibuprofen, some leftover prescription medications, even a few expired antibiotics. It was sheer luck Aaliyah hadn't gotten seriously ill yet. When asked why she hid the lunchbox under the bus seat, Aaliyah's answer was simple and heartbreaking. "I didn't want Mama to find it and get mad." By the time they finished, the clock on the wall read nearly 8:30 p.m. Ms. Monroe explained that Aaliyah would be placed in emergency foster care for the night until a longer-term arrangement could be made. Aaliyah stared at the floor, shoulders slumped. Charles cleared his throat. "If it's allowed," he said, surprising even himself. "I'd be willing to stay with her tonight, at least until y'all figure out where she should go." Ms. Monroe looked skeptical. "Mr. Baker, while I appreciate your kindness, the system has protocols. Foster placement needs background checks, home inspections." Charles nodded. "I get it. But maybe I could just stay at the station here, sit with her, keep her company so she's not alone. Just until a foster parent arrives." Ms. Monroe conferred briefly with a superior and then, after some paperwork and a lot of stern warnings about boundaries, agreed. Charles felt a rush of fierce gratitude. He wasn't sure why he cared so much. Maybe it was because he'd seen too many kids slip through cracks no one noticed until it was too late. They moved Aaliyah to a quieter break room, away from the noisy dispatch area. Charles sat down heavily in a battered recliner, while Aaliyah curled up in a corner of the couch, the blanket still wrapped around her. She drifted in and out of restless sleep. Charles watched over her like a sentry, his own eyes gritty with fatigue but unwilling to leave her unguarded. Around midnight, a foster care representative arrived. A woman named Mrs. Gloria King, with kind eyes and a tired smile. She knelt in front of Aaliyah and introduced herself softly. "Hi, honey. My name's Gloria. I'm gonna take you somewhere safe, okay? You'll have your own room, your own bed, and nobody's gonna make you cry anymore." Aaliyah blinked sleepily at her, then looked over at Charles. For a terrifying moment he thought she might cry, but instead, she gave him a tiny, shy smile. Charles rose stiffly and knelt beside her. "You're gonna be just fine, sweetheart," he said. "And if you ever need me, I'm not going anywhere." Aaliyah reached out her hand, small, trembling, trusting, and Charles squeezed it gently. He watched as Gloria led her down the hallway, her small figure silhouetted against the sterile hospital lights. When they disappeared around the corner, Charles slumped into a chair, utterly drained. He rubbed a hand over his face and whispered a quiet prayer. For Aaliyah's healing, for strength, for a world where no little girl ever had to hide her pain under a bus seat. Outside, the night was cool and still. Charles shuffled toward his old Ford pickup, parked under a flickering street lamp. He climbed in and sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard without really seeing it. His mind replayed Aaliyah's broken voice, the haunted look in her eyes. He had been a soldier once, trained to fight for the vulnerable, to stand between evil and the innocent. Tonight, in his own quiet way, he had fought again. When he finally started the truck and rumbled down the empty streets toward home, he knew one thing for certain. He was not finished with Aaliyah Simmons's story. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Charles woke before dawn. Sleep had come in restless fragments, haunted by images of Aaliyah sitting alone in that sterile police station break room. As the coffee pot gurgled in his tiny kitchen, Charles sat at the table, staring out the window at the mist rolling over the cracked sidewalks of his Decatur neighborhood. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was supposed to do more. After breakfast, he made a decision. He pulled on his old bomber jacket, the one from his Air Force days, and drove straight to the Eastwood police station. Officer Davis was just coming off night shift and looked surprised to see him. "Morning, Charlie. You holding up?" Charles shrugged. "Barely. Listen, Ray. You know how to reach that foster lady, Miss Gloria? I was wondering if it's allowed, maybe I could visit Aaliyah sometime. Just check in." Davis studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll make a call." While Charles waited, he paced the worn linoleum floor, the scent of stale coffee and disinfectant filling the air. Finally, Davis waved him over. "Gloria says yes, but supervised visits only, at least for now. Paperwork's gotta be done first." Charles filled out the necessary forms with trembling hands. He had never been through anything like this before. It felt intrusive. Personal questions about his background, his health, even his financial status. Still, he didn't hesitate. When it came to that little girl, no inconvenience was too big. A few days later, Charles pulled up outside a modest brick house in nearby Clarkston. Gloria King met him at the door, her welcoming smile easing some of his nerves. Inside, the place was cozy but tidy, filled with the smells of cinnamon and laundry soap. Aaliyah was sitting at a small kitchen table coloring when she looked up and saw him. For a moment, she froze. Then, slowly, she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, not the kind that split your face wide open, but it was real. Charles felt something unclench inside his chest. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said, stepping inside carefully, as if afraid to break the moment. Gloria bustled around them, making tea and chatting about nothing important. Charles knelt beside Aaliyah's chair. "How you holding up?" She shrugged, then surprised him by saying, "Better now." He smiled back, blinking against the sudden sting in his eyes. They spent the afternoon together, playing simple board games and talking in fits and starts. Aaliyah was cautious, but she opened up more than Charles expected. She told him about her love of drawing, her dream of becoming a veterinarian, how she missed her old school in Savannah, where things had been happier. Charles listened more than he spoke, nodding and encouraging her gently, letting her set the pace. As the sun slanted low through the kitchen windows, Gloria gave him a meaningful look. Visiting hours were ending. Charles rose slowly, patting Aaliyah's hand. "I'll be back, kiddo. You count on that." She nodded solemnly, her small fingers brushing against his like a whispered promise. In the following weeks, Charles became a fixture in Aaliyah's new life. He visited twice a week, sometimes bringing small gifts, a box of crayons, a second-hand library book about animals, a pair of pink sneakers he found on sale. He attended her first therapy session at the community center, sitting quietly in the waiting room while she learned how to name the things that had hurt her. He cheered for her at her first soccer game with the Clarkston Youth League, hollering so loudly when she scored a goal that several parents turned to stare. Aaliyah blossomed slowly, like a cautious flower testing the spring air after a long winter. She laughed more, made friends at her new school, and began sleeping through the night without nightmares. Charles could see the light returning to her eyes day by day, and somehow, without either of them ever saying it aloud, he knew he had become part of her family. The family she had needed all along. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Charles sat in Gloria's living room helping Aaliyah with a science project. She was building a model of the solar system out of foam balls and coat hangers. As she painstakingly painted tiny Saturn rings, she said without looking up, "Mr. Baker, do you think I could call you Grandpa?" Charles froze, the breath leaving his lungs in a whoosh. He stared at her bent head, at the careful way she dabbed blue paint on Jupiter's swirling storms. He thought about all the years he had spent alone after his wife passed, the empty house filled with echoes, the birthdays and holidays spent quietly, because there was no one left to celebrate. Tears blurred his vision as he cleared his throat. "Sweetheart," he said hoarsely, "I'd be honored." From that day on, Aaliyah called him Grandpa Charlie, and the name fit so naturally that even strangers assumed they were blood. Charles attended school events as her guardian, proudly wearing a button that read, "Best Grandpa Ever," that she had made in art class. On Saturdays, they went to the farmer's market, where Charles taught her how to pick ripe peaches, and the two of them taste-tested every free sample until vendors recognized them by sight. They built a quiet, steady life together, full of small rituals that stitched their broken pieces into something whole. Months later, after countless court dates and hearings, Aaliyah's case finally came to a close. Reggie Simmons was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 25 years without parole. Her mother, after completing a court-ordered rehabilitation program, voluntarily relinquished parental rights, acknowledging in a tearful hearing that she was not capable of providing a safe home for her daughter. It was a bitter mercy, but one that allowed Aaliyah to move forward without the shadow of divided loyalties. One bright May morning, standing in a small courtroom with Gloria and Charles by her